Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Matt, and this is Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit, your beacon of freedom and the American way of life. Tune in every Friday for a new episode as we dive into the world of liberty and what makes our country great. This is going to be an awesome episode, and we're going to be diving into a somewhat controversial topic. If you're tuning in on YouTube here, welcome back. You'll find this podcast also on our YouTube channel over on Iraq Veteran 8888. But if you're tuning back in on the normal podcast, thanks for joining back in. And there's been sort of some controversial subjects floating around, a multitude of different subjects. But the one thing we're going to sort of dive into in today's podcast is the whole talk of, military elitism and sort of that mentality and how it ties into, the transfer from, going from being in the military versus going back over to the civilian world. Also, a lot of statements that get made by various military members, too, that sort of opens a little window into that idea a little bit. Before we get too far in today's episode, I'd like to give a thanks to the show's patron sponsor, WeTheProcessor.com. They are a staunchly pro-freedom and pro-2A card processor. No monthly fees, low rates. You don't ever have to worry about being terminated or canceled by your current processor for what you sell. Check them out at WeTheProcessor.com. The question is, all right, is it elitism? We'll go over a few, examples in this particular podcast, Matt. But then also the other thing is, I think I can certainly understand the other side of the equation as well, though, where, recently when you and I were discussing this subject, Matt, I was kind of talking about how, you had mentioned specifically that, being a soldier may not necessarily be the distinguishing characteristic that you move forward and hold it as this chalice and say, hey, this is what defines me as a person.
Right.
We were kind of, diving into that a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that explains a lot. So when you start looking at, and I remember the conversation, it was about because obviously for those watching and listening, we were former military infantrymen, and we were talking about how we were not lifers. When you join the military, it's your normal contract is like 4 years, and then you can re-up after that for an additional however many years. And then you have guys that decide to stay in the military for life. So if you go in at the age of 18, you can leave the military by 40, and you're retired. Like you did a full term service. And then, obviously you get your pension and all that stuff. So that's kind of that goal for a lot of military that do decide to turn into a life endeavor. And then you have guys that said, it was fun, it was great, but I'm done. I'm going to reintegrate. I'm going to go back out into the world. I'm going to reintegrate into society. And that's where you see the mindset change. And this specifically came up because there were some very well-known, former military, I guess you could say influencer. I wouldn't say they're content creators. They don't really create content, but they're influencers. They do influence the culture and society. And they made some statements, but those statements are based off of who their friends are, and they're very insulated. So if you're always hanging around people that were always in the military, their mentality is that it's a very statist mentality because they've never really reintegrated back into civilian life, not for a long period of time. But guys like us, we got out, we did, 5 or 6 years, and then we've spent more time out of the military, living outside of the military than we were in it. So while our experience in the military helped shape who I am now, it's not the pinnacle of my life. I'm not basing all of my life decisions off of the experience that I had in the military. It's actually the opposite. I'm using that experience in the military to help make my decisions a little bit better in the civilian world, but I'm not letting it define my everyday actions.
Yeah, and I don't actually even recall, the exact words that were said in regards to that, or by whom. It was not necessarily somebody that I follow, but I'm following them now.
Right.
Who was that again?
Well, there's been a few.
The most recent one.
Most recent one was Dakota Myers. He was the Medal of Honor Marine Corps guy. And, it brought a lot of outrage over, the community in general, because it was a very elitist statement. And I was trying to kind of dance around that, because when you're an influencer or a content creator, you have a group of other influencers and content creators that everybody kind of flocks together and they hang out and they help each other out. And in this particular case, a lot of his friends are lifelong military guys. So they're using that mentality. And I'm trying to be very, nice about it. I'm not trying to be very disrespectful, because he obviously got the Medal of Honor. He had to do amazing things to get that. So I'm not disrespecting the Medal of Honor, but that particular agreement, that particular statement, I did not agree with.
Well, I went through that particular Instagram page and I was just looking at some of the stuff he posted, and apparently it was like a post-workout type of rant or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, rants are good. Hey, it's great. Sometimes it's healthy to get stuff off of your chest, after you've gotten in a workout and you're all amped up, and sometimes that's the best thing, to just kind of get something out and get it out of the way,
Mm-hmm.
when you're sort of in this hyper-aware state and everything. So I can certainly respect and understand that. And, looking back through that page, I did see that, a lot of the stuff he posts, he's just trying to be very supportive of people and trying to get people to kind of see like their inner manhood a little more, and to be more outspoken about manhood. And I think those are cool values to put out there. I think that that's a healthy thing a lot of people could benefit from, is having, so to speak, a role model such as him to kind of say, hey, be a man about this, right? That's okay. Like, our society needs that type of situation. So I think, reading into his commentary, which I don't have the exact quote sitting right in front of me that I'm not going to try to, read out on this podcast or whatever, but just go check out the video that we're talking about on Instagram, the little post-workout thing or whatever. You'll know it'll have all the engagement from all the hate. But the one thing I sort of read into was that he's not necessarily saying that, civilians shouldn't own body armor or train or get out there and actually, be more involved in shooting guns, especially in a military-like environment, such as the type of training that you're seeing a lot of folks do. I don't think he's necessarily saying that that's an issue or a problem. I think that what he's getting at more is the portrayal that people have of the image that they're trying to portray, and maybe even like suggesting that there are training qualifications in place that, based on the appearance of the person in question,
right,
or based on the gear they use or the training tactics they use, that they're somehow trying to, sort of put on the image that they're former military, that they're an operator, that they have these qualifications. And the idea being, for him, it's like, well, to me, the ultimate qualification is going overseas and, close with and destroy the enemy. Well, yeah, when that's your standard, of course, are there situations where even the elite military members now, like, all right, say you've got some young buck that's going through SF training, or he's going through his Ranger training or whatever, he hasn't been deployed yet. Does that make him any less of an awesome dude just, for making it through the training just because he hasn't deployed and gotten a few deployments under his belt? I mean, think about how active our special forces and Ranger community and just, anybody, regular infantry, whoever, how active we were in those years. And there was so much going on with the wars going on.
Yeah.
So it was a lot more opportunities for people to get out there and have those crazy life-changing experiences. So I don't think he's saying, hey, don't train and be able to protect yourself at all. I didn't get into the statement in that way. I did not take it that way at all. I just took it more of a, hey, don't go around, posing off this qualification and trying to teach people, I don't know, the kind of techniques that maybe he feels like you can only learn if you've really been in that type of environment, which is probably not untrue.
I could see that, and I'll tell you guys.
I can see both sides. I guess.
I'll tell you what I interpreted that as personally. When I saw it, and at first I was upset because when you hear somebody make a statement like that says, hey, you shouldn't be wearing body armor, you didn't do the same training as we did, you didn't go through the same experience we did, so you can't do it. You can get a little upset, but then you pause and you back up, and I start thinking to myself, well, why? What chain of events took place to make him or anybody record themselves to make that statement? And then you break it down. Okay, so it was a few days before Memorial Day. All right, check. All right, a few days before Memorial Day, and he's a obviously Medal of Honor recipient. He went through some stuff.
And I think it goes without saying that you've lost people.
Yeah, and then you just finished a workout, so you're amped. You know, obviously you don't know. There's probably some lingering PTSD. I think a lot of people suffer from that, whether they want to admit it or not, or they're diagnosed or not. When you start combining all those items and all those things, yeah, it's very easy to just go off the cuff. You're amped up, you're upset, you know, you're right before Memorial Day, you will lash out and you'll say some stuff that, you know, maybe wasn't the brightest thing to say or is based off of emotion at that point. So I don't think I think he just said that. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate because I think later on we are going to dig a little bit more deeper into the weeds on this. I'm just giving him the benefit of the doubt on what that is. Now,
I think all of those outliers considering, I mean, I think it's a pretty balanced statement.
Yeah.
I mean, it
based off of where it came from. I mean, if you're just using logic and you're not, you know, grabbing the pitchforks right away, because the one thing you don't want to do is, you know, we always complain about cancel culture and you know, wokeness. Don't become the very thing that you're fighting, because that's basically what happened. What I saw happen was like, oh, he said this, and then like instantly everybody went and got the pitchforks. But if you just stop and you use your logical thinking and, you know, critical think the idea of what caused this, I think you can relax a little bit.
I think so. And I think another good way to look at the situation too is, you know, whenever we see all of this lashing out within, I even hate to say the 2A community because that's such a broad term. Like there are different, you know, types of people in the gun culture from all different types of backgrounds, and that's completely okay to recognize whatever. I'm all for everybody, you know, exercising their Second Amendment rights and protecting themselves, whatever their community may be, wherever they are. As long as they're Americans, I want them to be able to protect themselves.
That's
so
right.
I'm certainly not saying that, you know, I don't view the Second Amendment as a completely holistic thing, but to put the gun community as a whole under such a wide lens, I think is almost a little unfair because there are certain degrees of that gun community. And I'm not saying that people that are just getting into firearms aren't an important part. Yes, they are. They certainly are, because that is going to essentially be the future of your advocacy. Is you get this big group of people that just got into the Second Amendment. They want to be embraced at least enough to where they can feel like any other community, right? If you say that you decided, all right, I'm going to get into playing tennis or whatever, or golf, or some random sport, or a better example for me would be, all right, I'm going to get into fishing for the first time. I've always been interested in fishing, but I don't think I've ever tried it. So I'm going to go buy a fishing pole and some lures and, you know, whatever gear I need. And I'm going to go to the lake and I'm going to try my hand at fishing. Would you really expect anyone that's out fishing to say, you know, hey, you loser, why are you out here fishing? Like, fishing's only for experienced people, and if you've never used a fishing pole before, you shouldn't even try fishing, because you'll never be as good at fishing as I am, because I've been fishing for 20 years, and there's no way you're going to be good at fishing in the next 10 minutes. Well, that guy could throw a line out in his first time and catch a giant fish that guy's, you know, tried all 20 of his 20 years to catch.
What about the deer hunting scenario?
Right, deer hunting. I mean, anything. But the point is the community, right? If you bought, I don't know, all your gear to go play tennis for the first time or golf for the first time, would you really expect to show up to the tennis court the first time and have some master tennis player say, well, you shouldn't even pick up a tennis racket because you're never going to be me? Well, no. I mean, who would say that? Like, that's just not a thing, right? So with the Second Amendment community, anything that can be taken as, hey, I'm not showing solidarity with other gun owners, we may not always agree on every tiny minutia or approach to how we want to look at the situation, but anything that can be taken like that, I feel like we have to approach carefully, and I think people should have maybe a little bit more consideration that if you say things that hurt the gun community as a whole, as broad as that is, It's super broad, especially right now. There's a lot of diversity in the 2A world.
Right.
Just because you're into guns, it doesn't mean you're the military, ex-military guy or veteran or whatever. That might actually make up a really small overall portion of gun owners. You might look at the demographics of overall gun owners, and the super tactical uber veteran crowd might actually be an extremely small minority in that particular perspective. You know what I mean?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's two things that you talked about just now that I wanted to touch on, and I'm really glad you mentioned it. One was, them being gatekeepers. So you didn't say gatekeepers, but when you were talking about why they would act the way they act in the first place, that you have gatekeepers in the community that feel like it's their duty to keep everybody else down while they're in an elevated status,
or be selective about who they let into that.
Exactly. And you see that with the like training / like military influencer that goes into that elitism, is that very few are not like operators. It's like, oh, there's a select level and you have to be this level, and they try to weed everybody out. And I think that's kind of what you saw with that. Yes, I just discussed that we should allow ourselves to be critical thinkers and read through that situation with what he said, but it was a gatekeeper move, like without a doubt, because essentially what happened was this person in particularly was like, well, you shouldn't be wearing armor and you shouldn't be running drills on the, because you weren't trained to do it. But how is anybody else going to come up if nobody does it? If only a certain select group of people have officially trained in the military, then you have a finite pool of content creators or future content creators that would be able to pass that on to the next generation. So if you think about it, how many people are in the military?
Well, to be fair, okay, and this is to go in the other direction on my comment that I mentioned about, why would a fisherman or a new tennis player or a new golfer, okay, why would they have a problem with someone new coming to the field and trying their hand at golfing and not be 110% supportive? Well, when you go fishing and tennis playing and golfing, you don't kill people. Okay?
Right.
So I think the disconnect is that, people throw around qualifications and they throw around titles and they throw around this document that says I went to this school or whatever. But it is a different thing, and it's very difficult for a lot of people to talk about, and rightly so, right? Because there's a lot of things that happen in these terrible situations. Warfare is an ugly thing, and a lot of things happen that are very terrible, and very bad things happen, and we try sometimes to repress that stuff. But the fact of it, it's always there, and it's always got some sort of an effect on you. So I think it's sometimes someone has been through something so terrible that they may not have a choice on whether or not that defines them, like defines their life moving forward. But maybe the situations that some of these people have been in are so extreme and so terrible and so unspeakable that, it would be like getting sent back in time, all right, as Kyle Reeves or whatever from Terminator, okay?
Yep.
And you killed like the only Terminator on the planet at that time single-handedly, right? Like more or less. If there was something that was such a crazy pinnacle, militaristic, it'd be like, I don't know, fighting aliens. I mean, something so outlandish that very few people could experience it in that particular way, right? It could be that kind of moment for someone like that, to where they feel like, wow, I mean, can the horrors of war be any worse than what I experienced? I mean, and there's a lot of military situations throughout, warfare where, I mean, imagine surviving the war. I mean, you don't think about these crazy battles where, armies took entire other armies and did all this crazy stuff. I mean, you think about the ashes and the remains and the people that are left that have to tell what happened and have to pass that on, So what was it, Gaydon that said that, no, who was it that said that history is written by the victors? Or no, it's the best tactics are passed on by the survivors.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that was Gaydon that
Sounds
said
like
that.
a really good quote, though.
I have to look that up and make sure. So at some point when Matt takes over the talking, I'm going to look that up on the computer here and make sure I got that right. But there is a quote that's kind of like that. So they view themselves in this holistic standpoint as the masters, and anyone that comes to the table has to have their approval in order to be, considered even anywhere near that camp, whether it is just the optics of the situation or whether it's the actual training regimen that those people are trying to put out. I think that's kind of like the minutia of that, at least the way I took that particular, comment. I wouldn't say it's a negative thing that he said, but it is a reinforcement type of statement. And I would agree. I would say a little gatekeeper, in there in terms of, hey, these are my people. Stay away from them.
That's basically what it is. And then the only reason I brought that up is because, unfortunately he did double down. And, when you start saying things like, oh, us, our day, us, when you start using possessive nouns on stuff, I get it. Again, we're combat veterans, but I personally never took it as an us versus them. I've always been more of a, American pro-freedom, which is what I also want to talk about. A lot of, and I don't want this episode to feel like we're hammering on vets, because we're just pointing out things that we see in the community that people really don't point out. And that would be that not all military veterans are pro-gun. So when you start seeing veterans going into public office and they're flying those red colors, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're pro-gun or that they're conservatives. If you start looking at look right now, a lot of the military veterans on the left are either lifers, so they spent 20 plus years in the military, or they spent 15 plus years in the military. And I think we talked about this before, Eric. It was like mainly officers, and we run into this
sometimes.
Yeah, very few that aren't, but they have that status mentality because they've lived that insulated life in the military. So everything it's a very statist mindset. And you have to be very careful of that, because I'm starting to see a very large trend of people running for public office that are using the military veteran on their resume. They're like, hey, I'm a veteran. I'm for this, and this. But if you actually start digging into their campaign, if you start looking at what their agendas are, they're not necessarily always what you think they would be.
I cannot find that quote to save my life. And it's going to drive me nuts, but I will find it and verify that quote.
It's okay. It's a good quote. We're going to stick to it. I think it makes perfect sense.
Hopefully it's not a misquote, but if it is, I'll let you know.
Well, we'll
is.
just quote it as Eric. So Eric 2021.
That's right.
But that's really what I'm personally starting to see. And that's where we have to really be careful about that elitist mentality, is because you're starting to think of it like, oh, it's us versus them. This worked in the military, so it's going to work for, the state. And I'm just always thinking like, no, that's not necessarily true.
Well, I think that there is a common perception that, people that are, either a member of the military or want to be a member of the military are, elitist, statist, sort of this progressive statism that is essentially like a socialism, type of existence, right? I mean,
it really is.
Just think in the military, your housing's paid for, your medical care, your insurance, your paycheck. I mean, a lot of them have clothing subsidies and all different sorts of things.
All enlisted guys
tons
get the
of benefits and everything like that. So for some, they look at the mothership, right, from this almost insect way. And I don't mean it in the way that military's insects. I'm certainly not saying that. I love our military members. I mean, I'm certainly not saying that, but more of the hive mentality, right? So the military folks end up having this hive mentality. like insects
Yeah.
do, where we go home and we're here in our little, beehive or whatever, and everyone's producing, and, I'm never going to have to worry about where I sleep, what I eat, what I wear, how I get around, where I live, all of these things are taken care of so that you can simply function and do your job. And in a military environment, it has to be that way, right? Everything has to be tended to in order to free that person's time up to do whatever their job is that they might need to do, right? That's why the military operates within the hierarchy that it does, right? Not everybody goes overseas and fights in a war and actually closes with and destroys the enemy in a kinetic environment in a two-way range, right? Some people in the military, they want to, be surgeons, or they, need to do water purification or construction or sanitary stuff. So just like society as a whole, okay, a military environment is a little tiny society where everyone has their little job and their little role and the things that they do in that given society, the things that are accepted for them to do in a public environment, They got their own police in the military. You have actual military police. So because it is a little society, it also operates under a very similar type of social construct that you would see in like organized government. A military really is just a micro, tiny government, a little society with its own little government, its own little rules, its own uniform code of military justice, right? All of this.
Got its own budget.
It's got its own budget. So it literally is its own sort of autonomous kind of thing, right? So when we look at the military from that holistic sense, and that's all you've ever known, that's how I believe you end up getting a lot of these military members that leave the military, and then they wind up getting into politics, and a lot of them end up being anti-gun. Now, many of them end up being like really pro-gun people, really cool and easygoing in that regard. But I'm surprised about how many veterans I see that actually take the anti-gun stance. And that stance has always surprised me a considerable amount, because if you've ever been in an environment where people are trying to destroy you with firearms or bombs or worse, right? Any number of random things, rockets, or there's lots of ways they can hurt you. But when your literal safety is dependent on your relationship with your rifle and your handgun, you know what I mean? Like knowing that if someone occupies the space that you're in and tries to get close to you and kill you, that's the only thing standing in the way of you and your enemy. How can you go from that stance, knowing how important guns are to survive in warfare, right? And not want to go home and as a civilian have the right to bear, the same arms that the military has, because as a civilian, is your life not important as well? Well, of course it's important. Everyone's life's important to them. So, even your little tiny military that you live in your own little life, right? If it's you and your wife and the kids and the dogs, well, guess what? That's your little unit, right? That's your little military unit. And it's completely okay to say that your castle is your fort. And if they get close to your castle and they want to hurt you, well, then you're gonna do what you need to do. Is that to say that civilians don't have the same right to self-preservation as the troops do? That's what you have to ask yourself when it comes to some of the statements some of these people make. When the politician ends up being anti-gun and a veteran, you kind of have to question like where they're coming from on that angle, because they obviously have to value and understand self-preservation and combat. Why then would you not be willing to, want the very citizens that you claim to have protected in the military, then you want to come home and vote for, laws are going to take their gun rights away? When you went over there to fight for rights in the first place?
Right. And that's the thing.
What are you doing?
You shouldn't be lobbying or putting in legislation to take away any rights. If anything, you should be fighting to restore rights that were taken away in the first place.
What did you serve in the military for but to preserve rights? You swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. So does that oath not for life?
That's right.
So if you upheld an oath to protect the very rights that you're trying to take away as a politician, what does that say about your real honesty towards your own oath that you took?
Yeah. And I think the danger is that we have, anti-gun or anti-freedom veterans going into politics, which doesn't really jive that well with me. We have to do our part to keep them out of politics and vote in people that we want. And the second thing is, like, to go back to having those influencers on, and they're making statements about things that you might think are benign. So something, and I'm gonna quote here, but I'm not gonna say the person. There was I heard on a podcast, a very well-known podcast, that this person thinks that yes, everybody should own guns, which is fine. I believe that as well. Or you should be able to use your Second Amendment rights. Then they attached, but you should have to own a safe and keep it in a safe. All right, that's where you lost me. Is it safe and is it responsible?
I'm still trying to find that quote.
No worries. Is it safe and is it responsible to have a safe and keep your firearms there? Yes, it would be very safe and very responsible, especially if you have children. Should it be required and must you have one in order to exercise your Second Amendment? Exercise is what I was looking for earlier. Exercise your Second Amendment rights? No, it should not. It is a right. But when you hear someone with a following and they have a very specific community, they will also assume that is correct, but it's not.
Right.
And those are the things that you have to worry about.
It really is. I mean, when you look at just the totality of that type of thing, you know, it's hard to not, you know, want to draw a very distinct parallel based on what some would consider a very limited scope of knowledge when it comes to, like, maybe just that one thing, right? Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of people that are gun folks, they're also, they do a ton of other things too. I mean, you're talking about the same guy that puts on a suit and tie and goes to his 9-to-5 white collar job every day. He might be a gun owner. Does that say that, you know, because he didn't do 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan that he's not qualified to be a gun owner? I don't think that's what he's trying to say at all. Mm-hmm. I think it's important that we definitely foster an environment where people can have open discussions about whatever they think they need to get off their chest. I think that's healthy for society. Even if it's something that we disagree with, that's fine, because I feel like it's a good mental health checkup for our overall holistic sort of mental health, to be able to get things off of our chest and to put things out there and discuss it. And, you know, and think about society almost like a marriage, right? In a way, it's like if you don't talk about stuff and you don't put in the time to care about the other person and have discussions, well, then how are you going to know when the person's having an issue, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the same type of thing. It's normal for people to want to vent on a given issue. Now, getting back to the original, maybe 10 minutes ago type of part of the conversation that I forgot to go back to, but that I was going to mention, is that the reason that we dove into this whole concept just now is because getting back to not really wanting the Second Amendment community as a general whole to want to lash out against each other and how broad that community is. Yeah. I think we definitely established how broad that community can be. And there are other examples that we can use as well, and we probably will as the podcast/video goes on. But I think it's important that we not create a rift, especially if it's a perceived rift that doesn't even need to be there, or that we think we see it from this scope only. And the fact of the matter is, no one's actually out there trying to do the very thing that that person, you know, is saying they did or whatever. Right. Not to say it hasn't happened, or that some of these people haven't tried to portray themselves as veterans, or like this stolen valor.
Yeah, that's a different story.
I think that's kind of, you know, maybe more of the dig I got out of that is, you know, you don't want someone out there claiming to literally have qualifications that just are not there at all. You know, the stolen valor, that's kind of a concept where someone claims to be a former, you know, special forces, or, you know, typically the qualifications are grossly overqualified. Whenever someone steals valor, they do it big time. They go, oh, I'm a Medal of Honor recipient and this and that, and I did 5 or 6 tours, and I did this and did that. Mm-hmm. And they'll do that to try to, you know, get society to think that they're, I don't know, some big shot or whatever.
Well, the interesting thing about that is with the Freedom of Information Act, you're able to actually verify now. So if somebody, let's say you're with a trainer and they're claiming to have all of this military training, you can FOIA request their DD-214, and it will tell you. They're going to redact the social, they're going to redact all the private information, but they'll send you that person's DD-214 if they're a trainer, because you wouldn't do that for a regular person. But and it'll give you the schools on the DD-214. It'll have the schools attended, years they went to school, like all that stuff. So
it's a pretty detailed document,
and that has kind of put a halt to a lot of the trainers out there that are masquerading as like, Rangers or special forces guys, because you can call them out. It
is very disrespectful to the people that, went through a heck of a lot of effort and training and risked their lives to earn that title. Mm-hmm. It is very disrespectful.
And I can totally see why you would have that elitism mentality. When we were younger, I could see it. I mean, you went through something that very, very, very few people have ever went through. And then that's just like basic training. And then you went to your regular training, and then you went to war. So if you couple those things, you're in a very, very small sample size of people within the world, even smaller within the U.S. So you can have that, like, holier than thou elite mentality because you've experienced and done things that somebody hasn't done. But as you get older, you do kind of grow out. Like me personally, I've grown out of it. And again, it goes back to it becomes less of the highlight of your life and pinnacle of your life and more of just a life experience. And then you go on to experience other things that
that experience molds your future experiences.
Absolutely.
So the person you are, it's not necessarily a product of that exact moment in your life, but more of a cumulative effort of all of the experiences that you've influenced with, and the decisions you've influenced based on that experience, which probably, that's where we get into like, good work ethic and, hey, I get up early, I do what I need to do. I'm responsible. Mm-hmm. I take care of things. I show up places on time when I need to, I feel like I can work with a team. You know what I mean? So all of those things start to come into play. The values that the military teaches becoming more a part of what you are, as well as your own personal views.
What I think that we were able to do that a lot of people that have that mentality haven't done, and I'm making direct comparisons here, and it's something very simple. It's just like letting go and letting that experience be an experience and not something current. Because think about how it is awkward. Like even when you and I talk about our experiences that happened 15 years ago. So at some point in time within the last 15 years, we let go of that and didn't hold on so tight. We didn't hold on to it like it's still something that is current, because obviously it's not.
Well, and also to be fair, a lot of the special forces community and a lot of the mm-hmm. Ranger guys, that have some really, really dangerous, crazy stuff they're doing, they've probably seen some really, really, really terrible stuff.
Absolutely.
And that can be really hard. You don't just let go of those things. I mean, our minds become this mm-hmm. catalog of experiences, and there's things that our brains store away in our filing cabinet that, unfortunately, a bad situation, you often learn something, right? It's important. Mm-hmm. You come out of the experience a changed person, whether it's for the good or for the better or for worse, right? Something terrible happens. There's nothing you could do, and that affects a person. And I think it's very, very hard for, someone who's had multiple life-changing experiences, not just one deployment or not just whatever. It doesn't matter how much you can experience in one deployment can be really crazy, even mm-hmm. just one. But you've got guys that it's become like deploying for them is just like a normal thing all the time, and it's just all they're used to, and they collect this catalog of very terrible experiences, both good and bad.
Yeah, I really didn't think about that.
I would think it would be very hard to just put that away. It never goes away. If you try to make it go away too hard, it drives you a little up the wall. You have to cope. Sometimes you got to sit down and have dinner with your demons every now and then. Mm-hmm. Don't just say, hey, wait at the door, and then never come to the door. I mean, at some point you have to greet them and accept them.
Yeah, you have to. A little bit. I think acceptance is the thing. I failed to look at it that way. About they did live a much higher tempo, operational tempo than we did. Right. So I totally could see that. But, at the same time, I would say that we have to hold them accountable for what they say, but also we have to understand, like we said at the very beginning, that there's reasons, there's root reasons for that happening, and we shouldn't take it to heart. Because
I don't think that that's unreasonable.
Yeah, for me, when I saw that after a while, I was just like, you know what, the statements that are made aren't going to affect me. I'm just going to keep living my life. I'm going to keep training. I'm going to keep going out on the range with my LARPing gear, and we'll be good.
Yep.
And it will go on. Life will go on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's the best way to be able to, take certain commentaries. Just take it with a grain of salt. I mean, it's someone's opinion. And, think about any video you've ever made where you've gotten something off your chest and how good you feel to just kind of get it out there and air that laundry, so to speak. And then a lot of times you get some good supportive people that are in there and they understand where you're coming from. I don't mean it in like some snowflake way. I just mean it more in the positive acceptance kind of way. Like in the military, when you bust each other's chops and you make fun of each other, that's how you take care of each other. It's a mental health check. It's okay to bust everybody's chops every now and then. People could stand to, not be freaking cowards all the time when it comes to how easily their feelings are to hurt. People are too sensitive to just a little bit of wrist twisting and a little bit of freaking rib punching every now and then. That's okay, right? Yep. It's healthy to have a little bit of a fun poke at each other. It helps lighten the mood a little. People have gotten too sensitive, and everybody has to be politically correct, and everybody has to be woke and all of this mess. I think that the world is a lot healthier place when it's okay to make fun of each other a little bit every now and then.
Yep.
Right? It's okay to tell an off joke, right? It's okay for someone that doesn't look like you to make a joke to you about people that look like you. Like, it's all right to just joke around with your friends. Because believe me, in the military, again, it's a different world. It's a different environment. There are words that you would say in the military that I dare not repeat here. I cannot say it, right? But we call each other all of the most racially driven crap you would ever think. And it's just completely out of
jest.
It's not real. But in the military, you're in such weird situations together. You're in a potentially life-ending situation. Like, you could die doing something, right? How can you not be anything but the most honest you can be? And it's like the things that you'll say to each other, like if an average civilian or someone that didn't understand, they just don't get it, if they heard the conversation, they would be like, like their jaw would drop. Because the thing is, the movies, when they try to get all this kind of, if you look at the movie, I think it was Aliens, the second Aliens movie, the one where they had the Marine Corps group, the Space Marines that went out to the little, base or whatever. I forget which one that was. But anyway, like they're always trying to get that gear room talk and all that banter that goes on between military members. And they have to tone it down like super, super low to what, society accepts is what people really say in those situations. Because if we were to make a movie or a piece of content where we just hid a camera inside of a ready room for like a Ranger group, well, they're probably actually a little more gentleman-like to each other than the average, grunts or whatever. Yeah. But if you went down to just some random bunk room, on a military camp and just stuck a hidden camera in the corner, you'd be pretty surprised by what you
really would. It's so much so that it's almost like a fraternity house with highly trained guys running around with guns.
It's so bad. It is so bad.
I mean, it's like pranks, tricks, jokes, like just I agree with you 100%. So much so that when I just left the Army, I met my now wife, but we were dating, and so bad. We went on a date. She took me to one of her friends' barbecues, and I just got out of the Army, so I'm used to talking with my platoon, and we're like, hey, we're like busting chops. So in my mind, I'm like, this is the way it is. This actually loops back in because this is like that mindset of like it's not like being in the military. So we get there, and we're all just kind of chatting, and I like bust out like these inappropriate jokes, let's just say, And they all looked at me and they were like, "What are you saying?" Yeah, and at that moment, I realized that the real world is not like being in the military at all.
The real world is nothing like being in the military. And
it was like my wife, my now wife looks at me and she was like, "Oh my God." It was terrible, man. It was so bad.
And every branch kind of has its own version of cruel and crazy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's something that it's an experience in life that when you're younger, and
I would say that, all right, the Air Force, they're probably more of like the pranksters. They're the kind of guys that are going to do like clever little dumb things, or clever and stupid things at the same time, if that makes sense. They're going to come up with little pranks where you open up something and shoots out, or they put peanut butter under your
something that requires engineering or something.
Yeah, so the Air Force the Air Force would seem like the type that they're more pranks and funny pictures and jokes and crap like that. And then let's just go over to like the Navy. Like they're the ones that, in my mind, those are the guys that are like, they swear like every other word, like they cuss a lot.
Swear like a sailor.
Oh, it's totally all about the cussing and the jokes and everything. And then like you get over to the Army, and I feel like the Army, it's more of the, I would say it's more of the, if I can use this word, it's guys, it's literally a scientific word. So please, it's a real word. But you look at the homoerotica type of thing. Look, it is what it is. But that's how the jokes in the Army usually go.
Well, I have a good story
they joke
for that.
about, well,
Well, they actually like they will have you hazed very homoerotically as well.
Yeah.
I got a funny story about that.
Yeah. So, and then the Marine Corps, it's like, that's when you get more into like the jokes about murder and suicide. So look, to be fair, I mean, look, every branch has got like, it's a group of people, they're all kind of, they flock to those given branches for a reason. And it's like, if you've ever gotten, a ground grunt like me, in the same room with a nuclear submarine operator like Mark Novak. Look, being on a nuclear submarine and being in a tent are two very, very different things and require two very different minds to sustain.
So you nailed it with the homoerotic stuff in the Army, because do you remember what the Cav Scouts, how they hazed their first lieutenant?
I think they duct taped him to a cot and started like inserting things into him.
Well, that might have been a different method, but when we deployed,
saying, guys.
Yeah, our Cav Scouts. We had a really cool platoon of Cav Scouts, 19 Deltas, which are very interesting folks, by the way. They walk around with the Stetsons and the Spurs, and they're all cowboys.
I can only say on this podcast about 10% of what I want to say in regards to
this. This is true.
I have to give you the PG version here.
So they got a new first lieutenant, and this is how the hierarchy works with specialty units. So scouts are definitely a specialty unit. The platoon leader couldn't take command of the platoon until he had been indoctrinated into the platoon, and to do this, he had, in front of the entire platoon, had to squat down and pick up a long neck beer bottle with his buttocks, with no hands. And he couldn't take command until he successfully was able to pick this bottle up.
Now, did he have to like move it on an obstacle course or something?
No, and his pants had to be on, which made it even more difficult because
Are you speaking from experience?
I can only imagine that you can't gauge the level of pressure needed to clinch properly with the pants on. So you might slip and you might have an accident. So that only led to the difficulty of doing it. But needless to say, he eventually got it, and he was able to put his platoon in formation and take command of his platoon after he successfully did that. But
nice.
That's just something that's very interesting.
So when they talk about the stuff you learn in the military, just know that there's a very broad spectrum knowledge base.
Yes.
That it goes over a lot of different things. And when you look at getting back to the original commentary, okay, when you get into that, you kind of end up finding out that, for some, that knowledge base involves some very deadly and crazy things that very few military members ever, have the opportunity or misfortune to have to experience. Okay, so when they're coming from that knowledge base, I think that's healthy. I think that's very supportive. I think that as a society, we should support people like that to be able to get their voices heard out there and to put their info out there and to say what's on their mind because, I think the mental health of our veterans is very important, and that includes each other. And we're always going to bust each other's chops about it, and we're going to make fun of each other, and that's normal because that's what we do. And that's when we make fun of each other, it's actually how we tell each other, that we're looking out for them, right? So it's sort of an unwritten rule of the road in the military is that you have to be mean to each other. It's just you can't have that kindness taken as a weakness. Okay,
it's true.
So you gotta feel lots of hatred, but I know we have our own weird way of expressing it, but it's okay. If you need somebody to talk to and, you look at veteran suicides and everything like that, it's very terrible, right? So I think we should certainly support an environment where our military members obviously are able to speak their minds and say whatever the heck they want, whether we agree with it or disagree with it. It's irrelevant because it opens up a conversation that can lead to a greater conversation. And then greater conversations lead to change in culture and change in society. And honestly, as the culture changes, then so do the laws. So when we look at all of these anti-gun laws that we see in front of us and all the ones that are already on the books and then all the ones that are wanting to propose, the way we have to approach this jewel, right, before we grab it like Indiana Jones and run away with it and have a boulder try to smash us, right, the way we have to view that is kind of just in its totality, and looking at it from a lot of different perspectives and understanding that to change the culture is how we're going to change those laws, right? You look at, honestly, we'll even just quickly get into the basic maps that you can pull up that show the amount of carry permits and the way that the permitting system has changed over to more like constitutional carry.
Yeah.
On the YouTube channel here, if you're following us on YouTube, we'll put a link down in the description box below that sends you to what I'm talking about, this map, these reference maps. But they have these maps that show how it's changed over like the last 30, 40 years. And now we have more constitutional carry states than ever, and that amount is growing, right? So culture has changed to where a wider variety of people see the value in gun ownership, want to carry guns. All right, now crime going in either direction or this perception of crime and shootings, that's a completely different type of thing. But I'm not even suggesting why someone might be buying the guns or what their overall reasoning would be. I'm not going to assume to know all of those details about every single person. That would be absurd. But you can say that as more people from a wider variety of different backgrounds have become gun owners, the culture has successfully changed because now you see more states with constitutional carry laws. You see more states adopting statewide 2A sanctuary rules and things like that. You have other states that are, offering all kind of incentives, like up in Wyoming. You can actually move if you move your manufacturing facility to Wyoming, okay, and you'll get like these awesome tax breaks. And so they're actually trying to provide like really great tax incentives for people to bring 2A industry to their states. So the 2A as a lifestyle and as a means of our protection and a means of us, enjoying a really fun hobby as well. I mean, guns are an awesome hobby. They're a way of life. They're a means of self-defense. They're a means of protection. And they're a means of protecting ourselves from a tyrannical government that would mean us harm or as citizens. So when we look at it in that holistic standpoint, again, getting back to it, perspective is an important thing. And I think it's an awesome thing that we have social media and that people can put themselves out there and garner a bit of support. And that's how you honestly change hearts and minds is by changing people's perspective and their attitude towards a certain situation. And I think overall, as a whole, people do wind up kind of changing their minds slowly over time as they agree more and more with a given person on a given subject. I mean, that's why they want to censor us so bad, because we're so open and honest. We're almost a little too honest for some people.
It's too much for the YouTubes. They like to shadow ban folks. No, I mean, that's been a great conversation, and I think that we did touch on pretty much everything that, you know, we wanted to, as far as that military elite mentality of like us versus them. The only thing I would probably say is that I'm going to give a shout out to 2 content creators that I think do a really good job of embodying freedom that are military, and they embody that freedom and Pro 2A. One is Mike Glover. I mean, Fieldcraft Survival. He is probably one of the few military lifelong, he's been in for quite a while, he wasn't, that is staunchly 2A, and he's very open about it. And then I think there's another one I follow as Tony Cowden. He's an operator, I don't know if he still is, but great guy as far as his content is. I've never met him personally, but the message is really good. So he's very 2A, pro freedom.
I'm definitely a Mike Glover kind of guy myself. I like his content.
Yeah, does great content. But yeah, I would, if you guys aren't following them, or go check them out. They're got a great message.
I think that the message that Mike puts forward is pretty freaking important, because he always embraces the sort of philosophy of manhood and what it means to him and what he's developed as his overall, you know, type of persona. But then also approaches it in a completely unapologetically pro 2A way, which is honestly, you wouldn't want to have it any other way. I mean, if a military person's coming to you who's had all these terrible experiences and they're saying, hey, this gun saved my life, right? I love this gun. You know, this rifle saved me. Hey, guns saved us, right? Not any situation, but us being armed and protecting ourselves. How can someone put out a 2A message that could be any more relevant than that? I mean, because it, again, kind of gets back to the original comment. It's like, you know, someone who has literally used guns for self-preservation. That's an important person to have on your side, I guess, is my overall, comment there would be with him, you know. But
no, I mean, yeah, both of them. But that's really what drew me to it, was the fact that, you know, I guess that goes back to that whole making that transition from military to civilian. They were able to make that transition and not just be pro-military. You're still pro-military, but you're equally pro-Americans, pro-freedom. So you advocate for everything American.
Yep. Like David Canterbury is another good good example of that. You know, he's former military. Really nice guy. Yeah, I believe he's a vet and everything. Like, a really good dude.
Paul Harrell.
Yeah. I dig Paul. He's a really cool guy. He's real humble about it, real easygoing, and I like his perspective. He's got some good takes.
I like that matter of fact. Like, hey man, this is like, it's just, if you guys go follow these guys, they're gems, man.
Paul's awesome. Yeah, we need to do a video with him at some point. I've been wanting to reach out to him. I've heard he's a little elusive.
Yeah,
but I'll see if I can reach out to him. Absolutely. Well, we are running a little close on time here on this podcast here today, so we're probably going to wrap things up. We will see you next week. We hope everybody has an awesome week. And I think we really got into the weeds on this subject enough in terms of, I think we looked at it from both sides of the coin pretty well.
Yeah, it was enough to break open the egg and talk about it without being disrespectful. That was the goal, was to have the conversation without it be condescending or disrespectful.
Yeah, and you don't want either party feeling, you know, like they're having to be disrespectful to anybody. I mean, there are a lot of people that in the civilian world that do a ton of shooting and have logged a lot, if not more rounds than some military guys. So
absolutely. Well, they use those guys to help train them for like remedial training.
Sure.
You know, all the time.
Absolutely. So, guys, we will see you next Friday. Many more episodes here on Life, Liberty, and Pursuit. Live free, be happy, live in freedom, and we will see you next Friday.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Life, Liberty, and Pursuit. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else podcasts are found. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd really appreciate that. You can support us over on Ballistic Ink by picking yourself up some merch. And remember, guys, dangerous freedom. Have a good one.